Hi, I'd like to speak a little bit about some of the differences and similarities between what we're going through today and what occurred back between 1918 and 1920, what was called the Great Influenza, or also known as the Spanish flu pandemic of that time period. Now, before I say anything else, I do want to make clear that obviously today things are much, much different in terms of technology, our ability to develop vaccines, and the like. So that today, obviously, things are much different than they were back 100 years ago. But I think it's interesting to try and touch on some of the details regarding both of these crises that we're facing. Now, many people believe today that the great pandemic of 1918 actually originated in the United States and was actually transported to Europe with American soldiers who were deployed there fighting in the last year of World War I. And it's going to be this great pandemic of 1918 lasting till 1920 that actually killed more people in the world than any other pandemic in human history. The estimates are over 50 million people died during that time period. Now, obviously, the Great Plagues of the 1300s killed a higher percentage of people in the world at the time. But in terms of sheer numbers of people, this great influenza pandemic of 1918 to 20 killed obviously more people than anything else in human history. And it's interesting that the victims and those that suffered the greatest during the pandemic of 1918 to 20 were actually those in their 20s and 30s, who were those really in the prime of their life. In addition, those over the age of 65 and those under the age of 5 also suffered dramatically as well, which obviously is a little different than what we're seeing here. Obviously, the older age groups are suffering dramatically today, and now we're seeing more children suffering also. But in terms of that 20 to 30 age group, that hasn't been hit quite as hard as it was obviously over 100 years ago. That being said, what we also see is that many of those deaths, about 2/3 of all the deaths, occurred in only a 24-week period between the middle of September till early of December of 1918. That's actually the time when we see, as I said, 2/3 of all the deaths of that pandemic took place. Now, the similarity or the connection, if you want to make it to today, is obviously how experts are predicting that after what we saw this past spring, we may actually be seeing a spike coming in the fall sometime, roughly in that same general time frame. Whether that occurs or not will have to remain to be seen based on obviously the measures we can take today and learn from the past. So hopefully this will not happen again. Also, hopefully they'll develop vaccines or other kind of treatments in the meantime as well. So I think it's interesting also that both of these viruses are what are considered to be novel, in the sense that they're new, so that no one has actually any built-up immunity to them, and that's why they've been so devastating during, again, 100 years apart. So I think it's interesting just to touch on a couple of these different things in terms of some of the statistics, some of the similarities, some of the differences between what's happened, again, over the span of 100 years in the world.